Yes, this is your lecture on grounded theory designs. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to define what grounded theory research is, describe when to use it, and I'm not actually going to go into how it was developed. The textbook does a nice job explaining that if you're interested in the history. Then I also am going to go into the three types of grounded theory designs and identify key characteristics of grounded theory research. So let's get right into it. What is grounded theory research? Well, in grounded theory design, it's defined by the book as a qualitative procedure in which you generate a theory that explains something that's going on. In other words, you're seeking to generate a new theory and develop a theory to explain some kind of phenomenon rather than use a theory, quote unquote, off the shelf. You're trying to explain some kind of process or action or interaction, such as how do college students adjust to dorm life. And you do this when you want to have a step-by-step systematic procedure of understanding what's going on. A lot of times people think qualitative means anything goes, and that's far from the truth. Even with this bit of an introduction into grounded theory design, I think you'll grasp how systematic and step-by-step this is. And it has the same level of rigor and is as important and valuable as quantitative research methodologies. And one of the advantages of grounded theory design is that it allows you to stay close to the data. You are not coming up with your theory based in the literature. You're talking to people. You are watching people. You are reading what they wrote in their documents and using that to develop a theory. So in this way, grounded theory research is inductive as opposed to deductive. So that means you take your observations, you take your data. From that, you develop generalizations about what's going on. You try to understand the central phenomenon. And this doesn't mean generalizations in the statistical sense that we talked about with quantitative methodology. We're talking about generalizations in the way that you expect this to explain more than just the exact people you're talking to, but you don't exactly necessarily means it's true for every single person. It's in the middle. And you develop that paradigm or that theory. With deductive reasoning that is used typically in more quantitative research, we start with a theoretical foundation. From that, we develop predictions and we test that and use the findings to support or not support the theory. So inductive can be thought of as bottom up and deductive can be thought as top down. I should clarify throughout this lecture in the book, grounded theory is talked about exclusively being qualitative, but it is possible to take a grounded theory approach using quantitative methodologies. I'm not going to go into that because it's typically not done. I just want you to know that that does exist. It's not a black and white issue. Just like with experiments, you can have a single subject design, which is a small number of participants, or maybe only one participant, but you're looking at things in a very quantitative manner. So, types of grounded theory design. I'm first going to talk about the systematic design. And systematic designs are widely used in educational research. And they use three steps or three types of coding that are done step by step to develop a theory. So in these three phases of coding, the first one is open coding. Open coding involves segmenting the data and coming up with broad categories. So if you have transcripts of interviews, you're breaking up, the different things that are said. And then from the open coding, you go into axial coding and you place one of those coding categories at the center of the central phenomenon and all the other categories feed into it. I should clarify, going back to open coding, that a subcategory of open coding is properties, and properties give more detail about that code. Whereas dimensionalized coding gives an idea of the continuum, the type of scale in terms of magnitude, and where that code is placed on that scale. Is it considered an extreme example, a big example, a small example, and so on. So there's some thought of quantification and magnitude in qualitative research as well. There's crossover of different ideas and approaches in the two designs. Then after the axial coding, you do selective coding, where you're putting it all together and you develop a theory based on the interrelationships of the categories from the axial coding. So here's an example. This is a research question of how do millennial practitioners who work at public relation agencies describe their generation of public relations practitioner? How do they describe themselves? And things that are noted in the original text, people would say something like, I want to feel valued and appreciated, or we want to be recognized, we want feedback, we want to be rewarded for our good work. And based on that, you would give the open codes of you want immediate feedback and feeling motivated by feeling appreciated. So that kind of pulls that together. Those are all examples of how that fits in with an open code. And those properties of the open code would be things like wanting attention, wanting to impress people, and wanting a mentor. So this is a layout of how open coding can feed into the axial coding paradigm. So you have all your categories of open coding. You pick one of them that is a core category, and you look into how they all feed into each other. How do those other categories fit together to explain your phenomenon? Here's an example looking at disabilities and the virtual world. So this researcher had her various open codes of things like technology, activity, social interaction, disability, based on interviews of people who have disabilities and who how they see their lives in virtual reality. And they found that the core category that was going on is people felt like they had access, that the virtual world gave them access in a way that the real world doesn't. And those other codes were used to explain things. So the cause of needing that access is having a disability and also feeling a lack of access. And, interviewing conditions, those codes are things like the availability of technology and the need for an identity. Without those, then you wouldn't have a need to engage in the strategies. So the action strategies are things like online allows activity and social interaction, and people feel like they have mobility in space. And the consequences to all of this is a feeling of empowerment, feeling like they have some agency in this matter. The next type of grounded theory design I'm going to go over is the emerging design. Grounded theory exists at the most abstract conceptual level rather than the least abstract. So rather than having a visual data presentation that you would see in a coding paradigm, this would be less concrete than that. And you really focus on what's provided in the data, and you're not trying to force those data into categories. A grounded theory design that's emerging should have 4 criteria that are met: fit, work, relevance, and modifiability. Fit refers to the emergence of conceptual codes and categories from the data rather than the use of preconceived codes or categories from extant theory. And that goes back to what I said before, with it being an inductive rather than deductive approach. Work means that it actually works, that the grounded theory can explain and interpret behavior in a substance area and can be used to predict future behavior. And that's just part of what a good theory should do. You should be able to explain what's going on and predict what will happen based on a theory, if a theory is good. Relevance means that the theories focus on a core concern or process that emerges in a substance area. It's conceptual grounding in the data that indicates the significance and the relevance of this core concern or process, thereby ensuring its relevance. In other words, that you're looking at what you said you were going to look at. Modifiability refers to a theory's ability to be continually modified as new data emerge to produce new categories, new properties, new dimensions. This living quality of grounded theory ensures its continuing relevance and value to the social world from which it emerged. In other words, a grounded theory design is not expected to be static. It's expected to be something that you can change as new data arise. And that's true of any good theory, that if data come to show that, there's something that's changed and it should be modified, then you should be able to modify it. The third type of grounded theory design I'm going to talk about is constructivist design. Just to clarify, this is different from constructivism in terms of educational practice, if you are acquainted with that term in terms of teaching and learning. So in constructivist design, you are philosophically positioned between a positive viewpoint and postmodern researchers. In positive or scientific research, this means that the researcher is concerned with gaining knowledge about the world which is objective using scientific methods of inquiry. This is something where quantitative data is the norm. You're using things like experiments and surveys. Oftentimes qualitative researchers talk about how they're post-positivists in that they look beyond just expecting to get after this one universal truth, which in positive scientific research we have this idea that there is one truth out there that we're all trying to understand. There is one objective reality. Post-positives see it as there's lots of little truths and little different ways of seeing things. And then between that point and postmodern researchers, where postmodern researchers challenge the importance of methods at all. And in this, the theorists really focus on the feelings and the experiences of a phenomenon or process. And the beliefs and values are really critical here. The researcher is part of the process and very much feeling the process that the participants are in. You really avoid predetermined categories, even more strongly than the other grounded theory designs. And it's much more of an explanatory narrative where you are telling the stories and getting after what we assume is going on or what we think is going on, and getting beyond that and getting into what's really happening, what is really meaningful for the individuals in the study. So with these three different types of grounded theory, there are key characteristics. One is that grounded theory involves a process approach where there's a sequence of actions and interactions pertaining to a topic. And you expect to understand using grounded theory to kind of outline what that process is. Grounded theory designs use theoretical sampling, which we talked about different types of qualitative sampling in a previous lecture. And this is done where you're trying to find things that will give you the data that is most informative for developing a theory. So for example, you wouldn't do extreme case analysis because you're trying to get after understanding things, not looking at these extreme cases. Grounded theory design involves constant comparative data analysis, which I will go into a little bit more later, where you have an inductive process, again, bottom-up data analyst procedure, where you are continually generating and connecting categories by comparing incidents in the data to other incidents, incidents to categories, and categories to other categories. So you're constantly looking at how things fit together. Other things there that are key characteristics is a core category, and this becomes the theme that becomes the main theme of the process, such as the example with the millennials where, they want to feel motivated or, they want to feel acknowledged. Theory generation, where this is an abstract explanation or understanding of the process about a substantive topic grounded in the data. And there's the example of people with disabilities and virtual worlds where you get an idea of how they develop empowerment through this virtual world. And memos. Memos are really key to qualitative research, especially grounded theory design. And this is where the researcher is jotting notes, brainstorming, keeping track of their thoughts to elaborate on ideas about the data and the coded categories. A way to evaluate the quality of qualitative research is whether or not they used memos. If there wasn't any memoing involved, that's a red flag that it is not a good qualitative study in terms of grounded theory design. So here's an overview of the process applying the systematic approach to grounded theory. So you see how this is very cyclical and back and forth, and how you go from interviews to coding and memo writing to developing your theory, and then interviewing and transcribing, and this is very fluid. Another notable characteristic of grounded theory design is the zigzag approach to data collection and analysis. The idea is that you are going back and forth between your data collection and your category development until you get to the point where you realize you have gotten as much information as you can. And that point is called saturation. Saturation is when you realize you could do interview after interview after interview more, or observation after observation after observation more, and you're really not going to get anything more informative. You're not going to get more categories or more refinement of categories. Your data are full. And just a general visual to give you an idea of how grounded theory approaches work, is it is this very fluid process of data collection, developing a grounded theory, and then engaging in active data collection. I should clarify too, the grounded theory is both the approach in qualitative research that I've just described, and it's also the theory that you got from that approach. So a lot of times, if you see the phrase grounded theory, you need to figure out, are they talking about the actual theory that they developed, or are they talking about the qualitative research approach? So in summary, we talked about grounded theory design and how it is inductive, such as shown by what these people in this cartoon want to do. They have things they want to share, and the researcher is taking a very deductive approach and saying, no, I'm going to measure you this way, and the people are saying like, no, we have things we can tell you, we have stories, listen to us. So grounded theory approach would be, getting in and finding their stories and starting from there. I talked about the 3 different types of grounded theory design: systematic, emerging, and constructivist, and some key characteristics in grounded theory research.